Original jokes killed by comedy cliches. Tip 7. Make Funny Jokes Funnier series. Original jokes killed by comedy cliches is in BlogCast to help eliminate all the hacky, trite, overused phrases and actions from shows. Table of contents. Make Funny Jokes Funnier series. Eliminate all comedy cliches, segues or transitions. Action cliches. These comedy cliches all fulfill some very important function in performing stand-up comedy. But instead of understanding that function and creating something original, too many comics adopt the cliches they've heard in other comic shows. This mindless integration of these cliches is the fast track to hackville for comics. They'll assure all originality is masked by some hokey phrase or action that'll eventually bury you in the piles of the forgotten. Eliminate all comedy cliches. I'm not addressing the cultural cliches, idioms, proverbs, slogans, and catchphrases. Those familiar sayings are the stock and trade for all funny people who know how to write funnier jokes. The first step in eliminating these comic cliches is awareness. They are so entrenched in the stand-up comedy culture, most comics aren't even conscious they're using so many in their comedy routines. I cannot cover all of them in this blogcast, so I'll focus on the most egregious examples of these trite expressions. Audience greetings. Greeting an audience at the beginning of your show is important and can set the right tone. Yet too many comics, especially beginners, open with some slight variation on the comic's cliche. How y'all doing tonight? I'm not here to point out the bad grammar, but to wonder why you'd want to start your show with the same hack phrase as almost everyone performing in the show. I've been to shows, especially comedy school shows, where everyone that enters, including the MC, said, "How y'all doing tonight?" Even when the show was in the morning or afternoon. That's how pervasive this verbal curse runs in the minds of the comedically impaired. I wanted to ask, didn't you notice the other 30 comics before you said the same greeting? Comics all the time yap about having a unique sense of humor, then start their shows like all the other comics. Not a very convincing start. I also want to know if you've ever been in the audience of a comedy show while awake. As an audience member, we get fed up with comic after 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 comic who insist we answer the same friggin' question. It's as annoying as listening to the previous sentence. Then in the next paragraph, you're forced to endure it all over again. After the third one, the audience wants to yell, "We're fine!" And we think, I hope the next comic doesn't start the same way. But alas, we still have 27 more times to hear the same obligatory dribble, numbing our willingness to laugh. And yes, there are 27 comic after comic in the previous paragraph. Just wanted you to suffer like the audience. This has such a simple fix. You do it almost every day. Introduce yourself. That's it. Just do a version of what you do when you meet new people. Hi, I'm John Q. Comic. Nice to meet you. Thanks for being here. And it doesn't have to be the same greeting every time. With your original sense of humor and creativity, maybe you can ad-lib a new greeting for each new audience. Just saying, "Hello." Even kindergartners can do it, so why not mostly grown-up comics? But then again, it's easier to use the same comic's cliche as everyone else before starting your original comedy show. You don't have to figure out stand-up alone. We've got a full community of comics and classes to support your growth. Come see what's possible at gregdeancomedy.com. Segues or transitions. To compound the idiocy, segues and transitions are not needed in modern stand-up comedy. Every comedian can just start talking about something just because they're a comic on a comedy stage. It seems unnatural at first, but you'll get used to it and then notice how much easier it is to just start the next routine. What has taken the place of transitions is the premise. I have my own definition of a premise. A negative opinion about a subject. Yes, that's it. Simple. What are you going to talk about and what is your position? Here's an example of a useless transition going wrong. I was watching a bringer show at the Ice House Annex Room in Pasadena, California. Most of the comics had a few years of performing. A comic we'll call Dick started his show with, "Hi, how y'all doing?" So I expected the usual. Next, he asked a question as a way of bringing up the subject of his next routine. How many people here have a phobia? This may seem like a reasonable way to start his routine, but there are several downsides. Like in that evening alone, the 7 previous comics had asked a question as a means of introducing their topic or subject. I'd already heard 3 times, "How many people here are married?" There had also been, "How many people here like ice cream?" Twice. "How many people here are in a relationship?" "How many people here smoke pot?" "How many people here drink beer?" And "How many people here have had some bad sex?" From comic after comic after comic. Back to my Dick story. He asked, "How many people here have a phobia?" Now, this is where it can get dangerous for newbies. What you may not know is that if you invite someone into your show, there's an unstated contract with the audience that in the end, you'll take care of this person. By asking a question, you've prompted someone to answer, hence unintentionally inviting them into your show. In this audience, there was a sweet old lady. This question set off her phobia alarm, and she began to yammer, "Oh my goodness, I have a terrible fear of spiders. And this morning I found a spider on my refrigerator door and I couldn't go near it. I was hungry, but I couldn't go near it. So I had to call my grandson, Timmy. He's such a good boy, to come over and get the spider out of my kitchen so I could cook." Dick only had 3 minutes of stage time and she'd already used up at least one. He rudely interrupted. Yeah, that's fine. Stop talking so I can do my show. Unstated contract violated." The audience now hated Dick. He went into his bit anyway with, "I have a fear of heights." As I remember, he had some good jokes that would have gotten some solid laughs. But the audience's animosity toward him was visceral. They weren't going to laugh at anything because they were concerned about the feelings of the old lady. Here's how he could have avoided all this misfortune. If he'd started his routine by simply stating his premise, "I have a fear of heights," then moved right into his jokes, he probably would have had a really good set. But no, instead he began with the comic's cliche of asking a question to bring up the topic about his phobia. Of course, not every comic's cliche is going to have such dire consequences, but it's still sending you down the path already taken by comic after comic after comic after comic. Here are a few more comics' cliches to avoid. Have you ever noticed? A funny thing happened on my way here. But seriously, folks, I don't want to say, speaking of, true story, I swear it. Where are all of my somebodies at? Enjoying the show so far? If you want to know how to write funnier jokes, first get rid of the comics cliches. Action cliches. These are some of the comics cliches that are not said, but rather done. Leaning one hand on the top of the mic stand, pacing back and forth, looking down at the floor, leaning toward the audience to deliver a punchline, clapping your hands between jokes. picking up and smacking down the mic stand to indicate a punchline. Nodding yes when the audience is laughing. Picking up the mic stand instead of taking the mic out of the holder. Using the mic stand as a penis. Pretending the mic is a penis. These aren't all of them. Each generation seems to add a few more to the ever-growing ranks of the overused and derivative. Now that you're aware of these comics cliches, notice the ones in your show and continue to find the ones in other comic shows, then avoid them like unsafe sex. Just by not writing these comics cliches, you're learning how to write funnier jokes, because instead of relying on the tried and terrible, you're striving to fulfill the functions with original comedy material. Or you can sound like comic after 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 comic. In this joke writing blogcast, How to Write Funnier Jokes. Tip 7, eliminate comics cliches. You've been made aware of what comics cliches are and how they can adversely affect your brand as a stand-up comedian and the performances of your routines. Google comedy cliches and begin the eradication. Previously in this series of joke writing articles, you learned Tip 1, short setups and punchlines. Tip 2, end punchlines with the reveal. Tip 3, K-words make better punchlines. Tip 4, localize comedy routines. Tip 5, strong punchlines are negative. Tip 6, put puns in the setups. Tip 7, original jokes killed by comedy cliches. Improve how to make funny jokes funnier to get the biggest laughs from your stand-up comedy routines. In the next stand-up comedy blogcast, exciting specifics make jokes. Funny. Tip 8. I'll show how using specifics is yet another way to know how to write funnier jokes.